Good evening, welcome to Reloved Guitars, and just a little plug here. Steve Valance picks, funny little magnetic resin picks. I've got them lying around in different places. They're always quite handy. I've not lost them. That's one thing. I don't always use them, and sometimes when I'm sick and tired of very thin ones, I do go to these chunky ones with the magnets in, and actually I quite like them at times. Sometimes I get completely cheesed off using these ultra thin things, which other times I really like. And sometimes the chunky Stevie pick, these were his kind of prototypes that he sent me, but he makes these. I'll try and stick a link to his thing in the thing, you know what they say. So there you go, look, it's there for whenever I need it. Or better yet, it's there forever whenever I need it. Yes, I've kept them because they don't go anywhere. That's pretty cool. Anyway, tonight I've got, this is a funny one, I've got Greg's friend's right-handed Wasburn Maverick, and it's a decent enough guitar, nothing kind of astonishing about it, but it's got a feel of the 80s made in Japan Yamahas in my book. It might even be as old as that. Oh, we've got a crack there, look. Oh, I'm sorry, this blasted camera won't do what I want it to do. Stay there. Look, I think it's got a crack. Historical, no doubt, but is that an extra piece of wood that's, I'm not sure, maybe it's just cracked. Anyway, bolt-on neck, Strat style tremolo, Grover tuners currently, whether that was the originals on here or not, 3 aside, and we've got a straight through nut here, which is interesting because well, it's interesting in that they've done a good thing with the angle here. So I had in my head the idea that we would go with an adjustable tusk nut. And let's see, it probably will work. My only concern here would be that since there is no recognizable angle, let's take the tusk nut out and see. Yeah, since they've minimized the angle, then it might not suit this very well, but let's have a sort of look. I think that would be, yeah, there's a little bit of an angle. It's not much. They've done a really good job in the design here of making this go through very straight, but it's yeah, it's about 3 or 4 degrees, so we'll go with this and see. I'm sure it'll be fine. Chuck that more packaging away, thank you. Anyway, so what we're going to do this a straightforward setup. I've changed the tip. It used to be white, now it's black. I've also fitted I replaced the tremolo arm with a black tip. Not that easy to get in place, to be honest. It's I had to melt it a little bit or heat it up to get it to work, and I don't think it's all the way on even now, but it's there, it works. Now, I don't have contact with the owner of this guitar, so I'm just looking at where he's got this currently set, and that is as good as down only, so that's what I'm going to aim for. Currently it has a good first fret action, not bad at all. We'll give it a good old clean up and a good old fret level. Everything looks like it's got enough life in it. There is some fair old wear in there, but we'll get that cleaned up. And restring with 9s, so it should be a fairly straight ahead sort of task, he says. Tempting fate, as always. Every time I think it's going to be straight forward, it's anything but. So let's get you there. Let's first of all let me cut off this excess wire, stringy wires, which drive me crazy because they just end up either sticking in me or getting in the way or something. I know it's a very rock and roll thing to leave your wires coiled up because you're in a hurry and you're just about to go on stage and you haven't got time to mess around with prissy little things like tidying up your wires. Rock and roll! So, let's just, first of all, get straight on and remove this nut. Don't know what it's made of. Don't know at all. But we shall see. Okay, first of all, take off the truss rod cover, and that will just give me access to make adjustments if we want to. Not saying we will necessarily, but it's always good to be prepared for that. We're certainly going to check the neck relief, and if we do want to change it, we're going to be able to access it. I think with this I may take all of the bridge bits off and just give this a clean, because it's grubby and there's no reason why we shouldn't give it a good clean up while we're at it. So that'll mean take the tuners off as well. Now this one I'm just going to quick check. There's nothing is massively glued in or lacquered in, I should say. So if I get myself the rubber mallet, give this a gentle encouraging tap like that. You can feel it move and it comes away with. It's got a fair amount of glue under there, so we will probably need to clean up a little bit. Now I'm going to need a number 3. Well, I say a number 3, but do I know that's what I'm going to need? So I'll start out by getting this nut part of the business done, and then we'll be able to go from there. And I'm just going to make sure that these are of the right height. So it's quite tall, reasonably tall. I'm not sure I've got much in the way of shorter ones. I know that I've got a strange problem that I've lost all the other sized ones, which is pretty silly. So I'm going to have to go back to Gerard and say, Gerard, I need 2s and 1s, please. Old school 2s and 1s. So let me just disconnect this and go back. Let's have a look at a 1 and see how far off the mark a 1 is. Well, when that's going to be in, that's going to be as tall as it's going to need to be. So we'll go with a 1. We'll stick the 3 elsewhere. Right. Okay. That away. Okay, so I'm going to need to clean this up a bit and see what we've actually got going on there, because it doesn't look terribly straight, level. I think we need to get the old nut shelf slot file out and see if we can just ease this or level this up a little bit in all directions. Whatever's got caused this to become uneven. It should be there. Might be just a little bit wide on the nut, so probably just need a little tiny bit of something taken off the nut material. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by doing the front edge. I will be back with you in a second. Let me see what you can see. Okay. I'm going to try and flatten up the front edge, which is one way of just thinning it down a little bit. The trouble is it makes it a bit dirty when you've if you've already used the sandpaper for something mucky. But it's right, we won't see that bit at the bottom. So that's the top edge. Now I'm going to do the back of the nut and try and just bring that down a little bit. Again, it looks mucky. Okay, then we have a look on here, see if we're close to a fit yet. Fraction off still. So if we end up having to take a little bit more material off, what we always want to do is to make sure we're taking off the same amount each side of the nut, so that we don't end up leaving the these grub screws sort of stranded out and towards near one edge or anything like that. We want it to be equally balanced. So I'm going to make sure that I'm doing that. Okay, I think that's probably enough material with that, and what I'll do now is just clean it up. The secret of doing the nut this way is just taking your time and getting it absolutely flush. We can't afford to sort of round it off and go off in a slant or anything like that. So some experience doing sanding block work is always a good thing to have. Right. Okay. It doesn't matter if it gets a little bit grubby at this stage. It's just part of the way we have to go. Now we're just going to look at there, turn it on its side, get these strings out of the way and see. Yeah, we're close to it. Not quite. The actual original nut was a little bit narrower front to back, so as a result this this little gap here, or the tiny little step leading to the poly at the back here, is a little bit, tiny bit narrower than the nut is wide. So I'm just trying to get rid of some of the grunge that's maybe getting in the way. And we keep going. So it's just a little tiny bit of, adjust, tweak and adjust. Okay. Just make sure this is a good match. Yep, 35 mils, good match. And that is pretty much sitting dead on. And now what I'm going to do next, while I've got the strings off, is I'm going to now just do the marking of the frets, because then we're sort of some of the way there. Just it's convenient now that we've got the strings slacked off, easy access. So what I'm doing is always typically do it this way. I will start off by doing the nut adjustment, or getting the nut replaced for the tusk adjustable wherever we're having that, and then I get keep the strings on as sacrificial strings, and then we'll get the thing under tension. Whoops. Move there, get it under tension approximately to tune, and then we'll check the end last fret action. So while the nut is not fitted, I will need to do the G and the D string first, just to keep them under pressure and keep the nut where we want it, so it doesn't go anywhere, and then we can do the others up. Just keeps it in place, it's kind of handy. Yeah, I think that's okay. That's not a bad. It's just slightly more than the actual angle, but it's not a problem. Now what we do is get the adjustment up. I forgot to flatten the grub screw base. I'll do that afterwards. So just lifting this up now to our ideal height. Just check it on either side. That's fitted perfectly, and that's a tiny bit overhanging, but we'll take care of that a bit later. Okay, so now I'm going to put it in to close tuning. Now what I'm going to do is check the relief and then the spring height at the far end. So we're practically on the deck here. So let's lift this one up a little bit. Okay, so let's check the neck relief. Very flat, but there is some. That's enough. We'll go with that. Now we'll check the last fret action up here, and we've got about just over 2. So we'll take that down, down. Will we? Yes, we will. These are a bit on the grubby side, so they probably could use either replacing or cleaning. They're trying to strip the attachment, the fitment. What is the thing at the end, at the top of these grub screws called? It's the hole, you know that, but it's a hex hole. I mean, that's not a good word for it. Hex hole. I live in a hex hole. What is it? What's it called? The hex adapter? No. The hexometer? No. The hole of the hex. You know what I mean. What is it called? It has to have a proper name. What's the thing at the top of a screw, at the business end of a screw called, that the screwdriver bit fits into? The fitment. The somethingment. The slot. Well, it's not a slot if it's a star, is it? That's a posi. But what do they call it? The thing. Nearly 1.5. Fraction high. Down you go. This one too high. Boop boop. Boopy doop. The hex fitment hole hex socket is that what it's called? A hex socket? No, a socket's a sort of thing in your car tools, isn't it? Socket wrench, hex wrench. No, that's the hex key. Hex hole, hex receptor, hex female bit, male bit. Well, you can tell that I don't really know what the name for it should and is and should be. Okay, now we have the action set. Just want to check. Right, a little bit here and there, but nothing too radically bad. I'm going to take the tremolo arm off, and now I think we go straight on into the fret leveling. Now this one is interesting in that we've got a lot of fret wear, not an absolute ton of unevenness, although we'll see about that in a minute when the banana file tells us what we've got. But just on the surface, it doesn't look like we haven't got major uneven frets, but let's see what the banana will reveal. Now, normally I would say that I don't like to level frets just for the sake of getting rid of wear, but in this case these are quite worn, and it doesn't seem such a bad idea to see how much we can improve it while we're at it, because they are pretty old and grooved, baby. So let's get in there and see what's the deal. So try and do this without the strings breaking, because they are old and grimy. Right, so here we go with the leveling game. I mean, first of all, it's going to reveal the extent of the grooving, man. That's sort of to be expected. So we'll see that as dents, ditches, pits, baby. And we have got some kind of, we have got some interesting topography showing up, and it's quite often the case that the neck can be quite weirdly configured, even if it plays mostly okay from the outset. So my first run on this tells me cutting, not, cutting, not at all, cutting, barely, cutting, not, cutting, more cutting. So we've got a low patch here, we've got a low one here, a very low one there. So it's one very low spot, very low narrow spot, low patch. So the thing is, the low ones tend to make the next one play high. So part of one of the biggest things about leveling frets is you're really working the low ones, or the low ones are the ones that dictate what happens. So this one here is a low one, but that's not buzzing out there. That one's a low one, but it's playing there, okay. That's pretty good actually, so that's taken care of that. What it hasn't really done is got a lot of the, or not too much of the grooving out. So even though I'm fairly happy with where it is levelness wise, I'm going to go back and do some more with a view to getting a bit more of the grooviness sorted out, and that means that even if we don't get all of it, it means that when we come to polish out, sand and polish out the frets, I can usually kind of tidy up the remainder of the grooving with the sanding process, such that when you get to the end you'll hardly notice it and it really won't stand out. So that's not too bad. There's this one here, it's probably got the most grooving, but it's tricky. There's some scraping and scratches in the fretboard wood, the wood of the board. Again, not particularly surprising. It's got a bit of corrosion here. It's a well played, well loved old thing. So I move on to the second one, second track, the B track as I call it. See what the kind of damage is. So it's the G. It's the third fret that has the biggest grooves in it. That will take. Well, we won't be able to get all of it out of there. I won't try. So definitely a little flat spot or low spot up here, but it's still playing pretty well even at the low action that I've set, which is good. There's that one there, and that one's because it's in a low spot up there, this low patch, and that's what you get. That one. That's the consequence of the low fret. I used to think that it was low because maybe it's been hammered in a bit harder than all the others, and it could be the case. I think you can actually force a fret to go so far in with a bit of extra force that you end up with enough of a low fret to make a difference when you come to setting a low action and trying the individual notes. So I think it can be caused by that. That's the only one, and I don't think really do a little bit more, but there comes a point where you have to compromise. It's a very low action anyway. Do I want to keep on taking material up here to bottom out this one fret? Maybe we do. Maybe we could feel like on the last few frets leading towards the end, you kind of can afford it a little bit, because you're effectively creating a little bit of a fall away, or whatever people like to call it. Not impossible. But we're also dealing with a guitar whose frets aren't in the flush of youth. Yeah, a little bit better. I'm going to call it quits there because we don't want to take any more compromise. So now I'm recalibrating for the G track, and that's now needs to flatten out a little bit. Very, very tiny amounts of adjustment. Tiny bit more. Tiny bit more. Right. Good. Right here. Ding dong. All right. Onto the G track. And the second fret is definitely low at this point compared to the others, or the ones either side, I should say. You tend to find that the frets you've already identified as being significantly high tend to stick to that pattern as you go across. So two low ones here, low one there, and then this two low ones here still, low one there. So sort of similar pattern there. Hasn't changed dramatically. The reason I like to level like this, as you probably know, is mainly because I can do exactly that. I can do some leveling, I can listen to it, and I can hear that it plays at the action that I've chosen to set it at. And so long as it plays at the action that I've chosen to set it at, then I don't really mind about any other unevenness below that action. I'm going to leave that alone. I'm conscious of a little bit of the fret wear, and there's a couple of very worn spots there. I think that's partly why that one's so low. So we're not going to get rid of all of the unevenness, but the important bit is that even if we leave some unevenness in there, or even if we leave some residual unevenness, we know it still plays at the chosen action. If it didn't, I would keep on working it until we got it playing at that action. And of course I need to already know what a guitar like this will do. And it's pretty standard really. There are only a couple of rules. The flatter the radius, usually the lower the action, within reason. I think in my experience, the bottom overall lowest feasible action for a sort of normal wood construction, wood and metal frets guitar that I've come across is about a millimetre at the bass side on the last fret and about 1 millimeter on the treble side, and that's usually either very well machined made SGs, or occasionally it's what else is like that, Ibanez's. Tiny little bit there, see, because of that low patch. But yeah, so SGs tend to be able to go really low actions because the neck is very flexible, and most of the neck exists outside of the mass of the body. So when you adjust it with the truss rod, it tends to be very responsive and able to move in response to the truss rod, which is good. And then things like Ibanez's tend to be flat radius and very well made, generally very well constructed. So, so that's about the lowest you can get, is 1 millimeter in my experience. 12-inch radius things like Les Pauls can usually go to about 1.5 and 1.2, and a gradient across between the two. And then Strats, 9.5 Strats tend to be able to do about the same, and 7.25 Strats tend to have to be a little higher, tend to be around about 1.5 all the way across, or 1.75, something like that. And that's because when you get to the tighter, more curved radii, if you get down in that sort of department, the geometry of the tight curve beats. I mean, it'll play. Should be clear that you can make them play without the notes buzzing or choking. But when I say you can't get away with it, what I mean is you won't be able to get bends, or big bends, without them choking. On a 7.25, you tend to, if you're down at 1.5 here, you tend to get chokes when you bend across the high E across here. It's not bad. Happy with that. And the final track. So, like I say, with an older guitar like this, the battle is to get your frets level, get your remove any fret slap that might be getting into play, and to get rid of as much of the wear grooves as you reasonably can without costing too much in the way of fret metal. Without, being kind of realistic, bearing in mind that an old guitar like this is all George can afford. No, an old guitar is already somewhere well through the lifespan of its frets, so that we got to factor in that we don't necessarily have an awful lot of metal to start with. It's not marginal by any means, but it's not new, so we've got to just keep that in mind when we're leveling. So right at this end it starts to get a bit fret slappy, as I would call it. So I'm going to put the old bar down on it at this end, and I'm really just going to focus on this part of the neck more than anything else. Just see if we can, basically looking to bottom out the low frets that are causing that slight choke or slight fret slap at this end. Basically just means that thanks to this little patch of low frets, there isn't quite enough room for the frets to move while notes are being played. So taking them down generally is better. That's good. So that's it done. It's not the mildest leveling I'll ever have done compared to, for example, last night when I leveled a Epiphone ES339, the new ones, which actually have really fantastic quality frets, very, very level, good condition frets. And so the amount of leveling I had to do on that was very, very small comparative to this. So this is a a bit more of a hit, but we've got uneven patches or zones of hills and valleys to take care of on this, and we've got fret wear as well to try and tidy up a bit. So when I'm taking the strings off on this guitar with an adjustable tusk nut, I take the outside off first and move inwards to the middle two, which means when I get there I can take this off without there being any risk of it sending the nut pinging off into the distance, which it can do. So what I think I will do is take the tuners off this and do a bit of overall cleaning up, because it's kind of had a hard life, or a productive life. It's got a nice feeling neck though. It's a very good 80s feel to it, which I muchly like. It's sort of a bit Ibanez-y right there, quite narrow, quite thin I should say. Okay, these strings have done their service. Time to get them out. Oh, to get them out I probably might as well just take these out. When I take the tuners off, I'll also have a look. Sorry, you can't see down there. Also have a look at the split in the wood and make sure it's okay. This is a model BT 4-stroke BK. BT4 black, I guess. Okay, so lowish or alloy, thin alloy, small, lightweight alloy. What's it? Bridge thingy. But again, actually nothing too wrong with that. So you can see this is a mucky guitar, and I will undergo the deep cleaning process. I know it's one of those things that not kind of exactly specified whether that's what's wanted or not, but hey, I thought maybe we'll just make sure that it's nice and clean to hand back. So what I'm going to do is take these off as well. These springs, just get as much of a clean up as possible. So get the bridge off. The bridge components are filthy as well, so we'll give them a clean. And I'll do all of that sort of housekeepy stuff, but off camera. It's kind of a takedown really. It's just a much better way of getting everything degrimed and giving it a bit of a spring clean in November. Oh, missed. A little bit rustified. Come on. Whoops, rust coming up. Take each one of those out and just give them a clean with naphtha and stuff. And what I'm also going to do is, while I'm here, is get the tuners undone. We give this a good clean up too. I'll do that off camera in sort of downtime. Radio time. Everything's a little bit on the rusty side, on the edge of rustiness. But not too bad. It's got that definite feel of the I had a, what was it? SE350 Yamaha. My sister had one and I set it up for her, and oh come on, what is wrong with this thing? Thank you. Yeah, set it up for her and then just loved it. So then had to go on the hunt for more. What am I doing? Oh blast. This way, that way. It doesn't really matter. I've been watching some more of that blasted trial of Kyle Rittenhouse on TV. It's over, I think, but I was just watching, catching up a bit. Wow, it's quite astonishing. Well, that may not be a split, or it may just be the it's not joined properly. It's like it's got a little bump. Nah, it's not the end of the world. Anyhow, we could even take the neck off to work it, but I think we'll just work with all of this as one go. Let's have a quick look in the electrics compartment while we're at it. We might as well. Yes, watching the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, and it's just, oh man, it's so depressing to see. They have, some of the channels have comments on it, on them, and the comments are just polarized into this sort of hatred of, basically, to paraphrase it, they're half of the people who think Kyle Rittenhouse is a Republican hero type of, law-abiding, stand your ground, 17-year-olds should be allowed to carry guns and defend themselves, and that's all he did wrong, was defend himself. And other people who think he should be locked up, and he's he's a kind of complete Trumpite, redneck, whatever. I don't know. It's just it's hard to believe actually how polarized it is, and just that kind of. I've read some, well argued cases for and against, or why he is or isn't guilty of murder or manslaughter or whatever the different charges might or might not be. And they're interesting to see. But I can't, as a British person, or English-ish type of person, mostly, I can't get out of my head the absolute craziness of each of the components of that, that a 17-year-old who wasn't old enough to even have a license, but even that somebody 18 could own an M16 and walk down the street, but open carrying it during a riot, and the fact that he's done that, and he's underage, and he's got absolutely no legal right to do that, just seems absolutely completely insane, and that he didn't have enough common sense to, well, that's where you get into the arguments, where people in favour of what he did, I can't imagine, but people strongly defending him would say that in a case of civil unrest, good people should be allowed to arm themselves and defend other good people's property, really. I guess that's, and be prepared to use deadly force. That's what some people would argue, clearly. I find, as a non-American, I find that I mean, I always say, when I ever mention this sort of thing or talk about this with friends, I always say that I have, number one, I benefit from the absolute luxury. Some Americans may not agree that it's a luxury, but the absolute luxury of not living in a place where I have to worry about either good guys or bad guys carrying guns around me. I mean, you know, there may be some in the bigger cities, whatever, but generally speaking, I absolutely can sleep at night safe, without even having to worry about armed people coming in and threatening my life. You know, 1 in a million times it might happen, and then you go, see, you bet you wish you had your Kalashnikov now, but, oh, was that a trigger word? Oh dear. Anyway, but, you know, so I recognise that my take on it is from a position of luxury, of not having to worry, and maybe I'm humble enough to recognise that maybe my viewpoint wouldn't be quite so certain of, you know, one thing or another if I lived in a world where I wasn't that safe and that there were such risks. But I have to say I'm very glad to be in a world, when all's said and done, where people, 17-year-old guys with no life experience and absolutely no awareness by the looks of it, no real intelligence, certainly no situational awareness, you know, can, even if they're doing it illegally, they still can get a friend to buy them an M16 that they can then pick up and go find a reason to go and play hero down in a riot zone, you know, where the likelihood of being challenged or having to end up using that lethal weapon, it just ramps up exponentially when you choose a high tensile, highly stressed environment. And I just think that decision making for that young man is just so tragically poor. And I'm very glad. I'm sure that we have some such terrible decision making in the UK all around us, but I'm glad in the UK that it doesn't also go hand in hand with those people's ability to go and get a deadly weapon and walk around with it. And the fact that one of the guys that Kyle Rittenhauser shot, the one that survived, had a handgun and approached him with the handgun, but never used it to stop Kyle's using his weapon the way he did, and so the guy ended up just getting shot because he never used his weapon, which is kind of nuts, really. And he said in his testimony in court that he just couldn't. It was outside of his moral code to use a weapon even to stop somebody, to kill someone, even to stop that person killing other people. And you sort of think to yourself, it does not compute. Why on earth then are you also walking down into a riot situation carrying a weapon that you're not prepared to use? It doesn't make any sense. Why carry it? Or maybe was it that he thought he was, and then the reality kind of hit him, and then in the moment he decided he wasn't. Maybe that was what it was. I don't know. But anyway, it just seemed completely loopy. Anyway, so I've just been sort of transfixed a little bit by that, and really, yeah. I mean, even though I consider myself extremely fortunate to live in a safe place where firearms are not freely available. You know, and I know that even, you know, some American friends would be, you know, would consider that that I'm disadvantaged, and you know, I get that that's a deeply held view, and it's not a, you know, it's not a trivial, casually held point of view. You know, I know that people would genuinely feel that to not have access to a weapon to defend myself, a firearm, is a major, you know, serious disadvantage, which they wouldn't want to, you know, be put in that position to experience. So I understand that we have some massive cultural differences between the British and American cousins, as they say. But so this is a sort of a scrape down of 20 years of grime, because it's so baked in. It's kind of very difficult to clean it up without taking a bit of a top layer off. And then we'll sort of clean it up, remove a bit more of the sort of oil, and then replace them with some lemon oil. This will just basically get a lot of DNA out. Anyway, yes, so the thing, I've also been watching these things that are very popular in the US and now have come over to the UK, called audits. And I don't mean the not the Scientology version, but sort of common citizen people, everyday folk, going to police stations and such places, public places, and basically auditing the police reaction to them, usually just taking pictures, taking video, filming video from a public space of the police station, for example, or a public library or whatever. And they make quite fascinating viewing, because they really do reveal police forces in our country and in the United States are hugely overawed with their own power, or their perception of their own power, and they almost universally, when these auditors, who I have to say, you know, are very often in this country, they're very often sort of they would look stereotypical, perhaps, to a police officer. You know, they look like sort of scallies from an estate, you know, sometimes, and talk a bit like that too. But they're absolutely spot on in what they do, in that they go and start filming outside a police station, and then before long they get spotted, and then invariably somebody comes out and says to them, you can't film here, I'm afraid. Or alternatively, what are you doing? And they say, I'm just filming. And you go, well, you can't do that. No, it's a police station. And at which point the auditor, who, like in both countries, is usually fairly well apprised of the law, and will then say back to the officer, well, actually, there's no law preventing me from filming in a public place. And then the officer usually, or the police officers usually get really stamp their feet a bit and insist that they can't. And as soon as they meet resistance from the auditor, they then usually almost always abuse their powers, misuse their powers, shall we say, and they sort of scramble for any section of the criminal code they think they can search the auditor, or prevent them, detain them, search their possessions, and they usually cite the terrorist anti-terrorism code. I think in the UK they they always quote Section 43 of the Police and Criminal Evidence, yada yada, whatever. And that's the I suspect you of doing some hostile terrorist reconnaissance, and it's really interesting because the auditor quite rightly always says, on what grounds? You know, it's all very well for say you suspect me of being a terrorist, but what has given you grounds for that suspicion? And then the police always try you're here filming outside a police station. That's unusual, and in this current climate of blah blah blah, it's unusual and it's worrying for us because, you know, people want to do bad things to us. And the auditor goes, no, filming in a public place, whether you feel that the current climate is risky or not, is still a legal thing, a legal activity. So you can't arrest me on that, or you can't search me on the basis of that. So if you think I'm a terrorist and you want to do it on that section of the Act or whatever, that section of the law, you have to tell me. You know, I think a lot of the American auditors say, what do they say, on what grounds, or no, reasonable, probable cause. That's right. They will sort of demand to know the probable cause, and it's really interesting how in the UK when this happens, these auditors now, I must have seen hundreds of these things, and the auditors go to hundreds of police stations across the country over the last few years, and they do the same sort of thing. And the nearest, occasion, I mean literally 1 in 50, you might find an officer who says, "Oh, wait a minute, you're one of those auditors, aren't you?" And you know, the auditor will go, "Well, actually, yes, well spotted," you know. And then the police officer will then say something like, "So that's right, you just come here and you want to get a rise out of us and provoke a reaction." And the auditor goes, "No, I'm showing, you know, if anything, I'm highlighting how police often, you know, misuse their powers or whatever." And even hearing that in as clear as that, the officers can't stop their power trip, and even knowing somewhere in the backs of their minds that this is an auditor whose purpose isn't just to provoke people. It's a nice, you know, it's a kind of easy way to write it off if you think they're just getting up in the morning to piss people off, which they aren't. That may be an outcome of it, but it's not the intention. And the police, even though they know that, they still can't stop themselves from carrying on and misapplying their powers. It's quite astonishing. And you end up thinking, isn't there anybody there who's going to phone around, or isn't there a sort of head of, you know, keeping police PR intact, but who might ring around and say, right, national police stations of the UK, there's this thing that people are doing these days, and it goes like this, and they're setting out to basically film you misusing or misapplying your powers or abusing your powers and impinging on people's civil liberties and so on. You know, we need to be aware of that, and I recommend that when you see someone like this, you think about responding in this, that, or the other way, you know, and have a sort of a discussion about it, or a bit of training or an approach that you kind of all work out that makes sense to do, so that you don't just walk straight into the bloody bear pit that these auditors set. It's just amazing. But no, despite all the possibilities for sharing that intel and getting a combined constructive approach to the challenge of high visibility audit, you know, which now they can't hide from, because thanks to YouTube and the freedom to walk around filming whatever you can see from public spaces or whatever the bottom line is, you know, these people who think that they live in a world where their power is still, you know, exercised behind closed doors still. It's just like, how come you don't learn? and each time very occasionally you get a good policeman policeman or woman who totally gets it and responds in a really refreshingly constructive way, but it's very, very rare. And sometimes you get police who you can see one of 5 or 6 bullies come out and start, harassing and pushing around the quote-unquote auditor, and sometimes you can actually see 1 or 2 of the coppers who know that shouldn't be happening, and sometimes the auditor's smart and speaks directly to them and says, this is wrong, don't you? I can see that you know this is wrong, and they clearly do, and of course puts them in a horrible situation because they sort of tend to go along with it with their cronies. But anyway, the American ones are equally good and equally worrying, and in the degree to which those powers are misused. But I think the thing that's in common with all of them, whichever country they're in, is that bizarre and dangerous thing, the ego, when it gets out of control, and the double dangerous thing that people who aren't able to control their egos are in such critical positions of power, such sensitive positions of power. That really, really frightens me. I mean, it's as frightening as a 17-year-old brainless, dumb kid running around with a M15, M16, whatever it's called, thinking it's his right to defend his neighbour's property with lethal force. Oh, and carrying a little, what do they call it, fanny bag to dispense completely unqualified medical support in the middle of a riot when you're not a paramedic and you're not a trained medic. Anyway, but yes, that's a funny situation. So hats off to those people who do it, because even though some of them are kind of stereotypes a bit, in that they kind of go up to a police station in the UK in a sort of hoodie and face masks, which is kind of convenient for COVID, but really sort of veiled and speaking some often street patois. No, it's a stupid word, but slang, street slang, urban slang. In some ways you can see that they are walking stereotypes as far as the police are concerned. But I ultimately, when all's said and done, I totally support them in what they challenge, and especially the ones who are getting quite good at it as they do it more and more, and they're learning a bit of how to manage themselves and not get dragged into it and let their egos, because they're just human too. But yeah, it's a funny thing that it takes members of the public to do this, and no body, no organisation actually keeps the forces like the UK and US police forces in check. It's funny that it has to ultimately come from a citizen who's tired of having power misused against them. Anyway, I've seen quite a lot of the open carry audits in the US as well, and you might think, considering what I said about a 17-year-old walking into a sort of race riot, a white 17-year-old walking into a race riot armed with a M16, is a nightmare, stupid scenario, or a stupid scenario of bad decision making. I quite like the upfrontness of the open carry constitutional challenges that they do in the US. Personally, I hate being around weapons. I think the closer I am to weapons, the more closer I am to being killed by one of them, so I could do without that. But I do recognise that if your constitution actually states that you can do that, then you have every right to test the willingness of your local law enforcement to uphold that constitutional right. And in the UK, of course, we don't have a constitution, a written constitution, so we don't quite have the same thing. We seem to have depended for a good few hundred years on a sort of general sense of fair play and all the rest of it, gentlemanly, whatever. But actually it's becoming now more and more important. There are situations occurring more important that we should have or should have had a constitution to protect us, because things like even this platform that we're on right now, YouTube, YouTube censors, takes part in censoring what can and can't be said, ostensibly, I suppose, partly for the idea of keeping a healthy, oh shit, there's one, I get it, keeping a healthy environment for its advertisers to, where's it gone, advertise in. That's one of the reasons. But also, they conspire to label things, these gross labels that they put on things like hate crime, which then becomes censorable and, shut things down so that you can't say stuff. No, I don't mean. Well, actually, I do mean. I'm a pragmatist in that. I've always long believed that you should have free speech, unconditional free speech, and that doesn't mean that you go, oh yeah, up till the point though that your free speech is considered to be hate speech because of my special protected characteristics. In my view, if you have free speech, unconditional free, well, no, to put it another way, unless you have unconditional free speech, it doesn't mean anything. You don't have free speech. So everything can be said. There's nothing protected by law. Nobody should be so special a case that they are protected, extraordinarily protected by law against being called a particular word or something like that. And in my book, the focus should look at this cloth. Look at the state of these cloths. They are minging. So in my book, it's a complete up the wrong path, barking up the wrong tree, and all the rest of it. Having this hate crime or crime speech or hate speech or whatever that meaningless label is. I've long believed that the place to put your effort in is into developing people's resilience, so that they attribute the problems. If we're somebody who wants to go and call people names, that's their problem, not in the. It's not the hearer's problem. So I think concentrate on building resilience, so that people aren't offended or don't take offence, because that's the if and you might a lot of people immediately sort of go, oh, that's ridiculous, and immediately fall into defending the right to be offended, because most of us have a thing that we want to plead special offence about. But you'd probably have to agree that if nobody was offended by X word, then that would be the problem solved. And then, of course, the answer that people will then say, but it's impossible for nobody to be offended because, and the whole thing about being offended by somebody calling me a name is that comes from a paradigm where subtly and unconsciously mainly, I'm always defaulting to giving away my power. How I feel, I give away the power of that to someone else. So to me, that's what the focus on having the focus on banning speech and defining things that can and can't be said, the conditionality of free speech. That in essence legitimizes again the paradigm where I tell myself and we tell each other that you can make me feel X way and I can make you feel X way with my speech, and therefore, since I have so much power, you have to legislate to stop me exercising those words that can cause you, and in my turn cause me such upset. So to me, that we either collude together to make this sort of, I think, quite a powerless and reactive world where we believe that the way we feel about the sound of some air moving from somebody's lips, if we believe they have an absolute power to cause upset in me just by moving the air and flapping their tongues in a certain way, or we don't feel that way and we come from another angle, another perspective, and that is that actually I am in charge of how I feel about the words you throw at me. Yes, I can see your intent, and I can feel sorry that you're doing whatever you can to try and be unpleasant or try and find a way to press buttons, which in itself is not a very unifying and together kind, respectful thing to do. But that's your choice to be that way. But I've long since taken away your power to make me feel anything about the words you use. You can't. There's nothing you can say about my mother or my career or my fat belly or my hair or my lack of hair or my even you could try and find things that I spent my childhood worrying about, or still to this day have conversations with myself about, and you don't have the power to make me feel bad about them. If I do, that's my choice, my business, and all I get from it is if I notice you. It's like when people comment on Facebook, and they spend all their energy, save all their effort up to go, "You're an absolute asshole. You have no idea how to do that thing. You're such an idiot. You should stop doing it." And they've kind of built up all their gusto to tell me that, and all I get about that from them is that they've got a strong urge to feel better about themselves by putting someone else down, and I know that's just a personal choice about way to do things, but it doesn't have any power over me. And I remember when it used to, when I didn't understand it the way I do now, or I couldn't deal with it the way I do now. And all I see now is that I gave them the power to, I gave them the power about how I felt. So, and actually, I didn't really give them anything. I just chose to feel bad about their sort of antisocial, sad unkindness. And these days, I don't choose to feel that way about it. I just leave it where it belongs, with somebody who is so inadequate so incomplete, that they can only feel momentarily better by, criticizing or putting someone else down as they see it. And that's a fairly sad and not very productive way to live. But it's their problem, not mine. So that's kind of. I would prefer that we spent effort teaching our youngsters how to develop that sort of autonomy of how they feel and taking back their power from people, so that other people don't give other people the power to make them feel angry or depressed or ashamed or whatever the feelings people like to play on are. And that sort of, I suppose you could say that's a sort of self-empowerment, really. And it's no small feat to achieve, but it's A, completely possible, and B, I just think it's a much better way than trying to protect everybody by banning things that can and can't be said in order to protect people who, in a sense, you're admitting don't have the power to be responsible for creating how they feel about what someone says. And I would much rather be the latter than the former. You know, I'm far happier to be someone who you can't insult no matter what you say. You just waste your breath and show me that you're an antisocial, damaged or inadequate person if that's what you spend your time doing, but you can't change how I feel about my life and me. So that would be my preference, that we taught kids how to develop those skills, not set them up in a gilded world, where certain words are forbidden to protect them, so they never have to hear them, and in that way never have to explore developing that resilience for themselves. Because ultimately all that will happen is you'll ban everything that anyone gets offended by will be hate speech before long, and then it's a sort of 1984 kind of scenario, where nothing of any worth will be able to be said, because it will all be stripped of language will be stripped of its richness and its meanings. But in this case, unlike 1984, it will be done under the auspices of protecting the vulnerable, which is in some sense, a noble intention. But I don't think you protect people by further, weakening them or making them further disabling them so they're dependent on you protecting them all the time from hearing unkind people. Anyway, that's my rant of the day. I'm just trying to pass the time, because you may have noticed that doing literally thousands of guitars over the years, and when I kind of put them in my diary, I go, oh yes, Washburn tonight, in the workshop, and I put a little V next to it, meaning, oh yes, that one, I'll make a video of that one. And every day I do a customer job, I do a video of it, and every day I think, oh, what can I talk about? Or, apart from saying the same old, and we do this, and we polish the frets that, and now we're going to do this. And then I just think, what's there to talk about? And of course, then the answer comes back, well, nothing serious if you don't want to get demonetized, or you don't want to get a YouTube ban or whatever. So it becomes a scary world where you can't say too much, because you may upset someone. And in a world where offence is given but not taken, then we have to police what can be said. Unfortunately, that's what YouTube and Facebook, that's the paradigm that they're coming from. And I think it's an infantilizing paradigm, and I think they know it is, and I think it suits them that it is, because it keeps them free from it being indicted. They don't want to be shut down because somebody said something unpleasant to someone, so they're happy to ban it as a way of not running that commercial risk. Meta. Nice one, Zucker. Anyway, so yeah, every day I think to myself, oh, what am I going to talk about today? And sometimes I sort of dream of, oh, can I just have a day off the camera And sometimes I just do. It's as simple as that. These need cleaning. I'm going to do them. They need a scrub. They sure do's. Okay, well, look at where we've got. I'm going to give those a scrub. I'm going to put you back here for a minute. Truth is, I would like to just talk about any damn thing I'd like to talk about to pass the time while doing this. That's the truth. And why not? It always seems strange to be cautious or watching words, if you get what I mean. Oops. But still, if you've watched all of my videos, you kind of know who I am by now. I think it's impossible to talk for 1,500, 2,000 videos. No, it's not 1,500. It's 700 or something, 750 videos. Yeah, impossible to talk through 752 plus hour videos without giving a sort of a fair account of who you are. On the plus side, it's great when people come to visit because they feel like they know me already, which I don't mind at all, because I sort of like to treat people like I know them already anyway. So it suits me perfectly well. Cuts out the sort of stiff preamble-y stuff. And on top of that, I've talked to loads of people via Facebook and stuff, and by the time I've done that, I feel like I've known them for quite a long time anyway. So it sort of goes two ways. Right, let's line these up for fixing the screws. I really prefer to use this one with a finer or lighter torque setting. Don't want to ever overscrew these little tuner screws. So that's good. Yes, so anyway, yeah. Things you can't talk about, things you can, and the role of YouTube in them. I mean, listen, I'm not somebody who's going to break YouTube's rules on whatever they say can and can't be talked about, and then feel bitter about it if they demonetize it. I mean, it's, you know, I don't own this platform, and if they have a rule and they want to run it that way, that's their business. I'm entitled to set the rules. But I still think that a more constructive, actually massively more constructive approach for our future, if we are going to have one, and the future of our youngsters, is to develop people who have, yeah, resilience, not kind of, you know, flaky, you know, and at every time things get difficult, they call for another word to be banned because it hurts their feelings too much. And I'm not getting all Republican or what do they call it, what's that thing, the Proud Boys-ish, about suck it up, snowflake. But there is in some of those stances, there is a valid point, you know, that is, I no more want to go around trying to upset people if I know that they're, for example, if I know that you're sensitive and you don't like being called fat, and if I come round to yours, and I make comments about your weight and how you look and stuff, and I know that you're sensitive, and I know you're likely to use that to feel bad and depressed about it, then if I care about you, I'm not going to come around your place and do that. However, within reason, I would still prefer, instead of having a situation where you expect me never to use the word fat or ever mention weight or something like that, I would much rather support you, or you support me if it's bothering me. I'd much rather we support each other to let go of the attachment, the need to be hurt about it and what we feel about it. Now, you could say, oh, but that's massively deep and psychological, and how can anyone help someone overcome 20 years of shame and parental abuse or whatever else? And well, no, it doesn't really matter how big the task is. It's still the right task to be done. It's still better to be strong and free of the internal bad feeling about somebody using, referring to your weight, for example, than it is to try and make a world in which nobody mentions it, or nobody shows it in a film, or nobody shows the opposite, really skinny, lovely people, and all that sort of stuff. It's like, we can often go off down the well-intended avenue of trying to make a nice world where people feel good, but we're still actually, no matter how honourable it looks, we can still end up essentially contributing to the problem, which is legitimizing this paradigm where we grow up and unquestioningly accept that other people make us feel this way or that way. And a chap called Chris wrote to me, emailed me today about this, probably why I'm thinking about it. And he said he was watching an old video in which I talked a bit about this thing about not being able to be made, or having control, or being in charge of how I feel about something. And he said it reminded him of a writer that he likes, and gave me a link to his book. And and that's always been a focus of mine. It's not always been. As I learned more about me, I suppose, it became eventually a sort of a paradigm that I operate from, and it's so much better than how I would have run my life before, being kind of susceptible to people's stuff, so if somebody's, I could never have run a YouTube channel before, when, and even when I started doing this, it still wasn't an easy thing. I was still, to some degree, I'd fall back into buying into, or wanting to feel bad when somebody made a comment about something I did. And it was a good challenge for me, because I had to look at it very, straight in the eye and say to myself, who's in charge of this? And I had to overcome that temptation to go backwards into giving away that power to choose how I feel to somebody miles away, who at any time of night or day, for their own insignificant and twisted reasons, would go on their computer and choose to have a go at making me feel terrible about the nice day that I'd just had, or whatever it was. And I decided that no, it's not going to be someone else's prerogative to do that. It's going to remain my decision, and it has. But it's not immediately easy when we choose to move away from that old way of doing it. That's for sure, because it's a very deeply entrenched habit. And I honestly, I've seen people fight furiously for the right to stay uncontrollably offended and reactive. Basically, reactive means that they go through life in a way that they stagger through life in totally open to somebody else coming along and changing how they feel about the day, about themselves, about life in general, about the planet. And that's just, to me, I can't live like that. I won't live like that. It's not somebody else's power to do that. Now, like I said, I recognise how tempting and easy it can be to give in to that thing and revert back to choosing to feel bad because somebody came on and said, you're a complete wanker, mate, you've got no idea about guitars and you should go home and die, or whatever they say, something like that. It doesn't really matter, but and it's common enough. You know, there are enough people out there who makes them feel better to do that. And I think what matters to me is that around about the same time that I stopped being at the mercy of that, or giving my power of how I feel up to random people over whom I have no control. When I stopped doing that, I also, it was the same time as when kind of around the same time, I stopped getting anything out of doing it myself. And there's a bit of honesty you have to do, I think, in that process, where you do have to face up to how much you've done it yourself, or how much, understanding what the payoffs can be when I used to do it, because I used to get a kick out of finding somebody who'd got something wrong, and then it wasn't like articulated, like, oh, you idiot, I've caught you out, but there would be my ego. I could feel my ego getting a little boost, unconscious. It's not even intellectual or thought through. It's just a little feel good, a squirt of dopamine or whatever, because totally almost subconscious, because I'd caught somebody out, or I'd found somebody wrong and I was right. And the thing that really made the difference for me is when I started to recognize that and be honest about it, and just see how enslaved to it I was, even though on paper I hate that sort of thing, or I would say I hated that sort of thing way back then, but I still had to face up to that sort of hidden ego bit that was still getting a kick out of being right when somebody else was wrong. And when I finally kind of, I don't know what the word would be, weaned myself off that as much as I can, or more or less, then at the same time I stopped being at the mercy of other people's comments. And it's a liberating thing, I have to say. Let's use this tray. I'm going to get some soap and some water. Yeah, totally liberating thing. I wouldn't want it any other way. But I think as I said, you actually have to. You can't achieve that without facing up to your own demons, if you like, or the dirty side of your own character that gets a kick out of doing it, because they're part of the two sides of the same thing. And I found that if you can't stop one whilst being in the thrall of the other, I suppose you could call it, use a sort of Dungeons and Dragons type of word. And actually, I think what I've noticed is that whenever I've talked with people who conduct themselves like that and are very much victims of other people all the time, and I don't mean that some people aren't genuinely victims of bullies or people who physically abuse them and so on. There are victims of things, but a lot of the people who I've known who were constantly hurt by other people's, on a little level, day in, day out, you know people who, in any situation, you see those people on Facebook who will constantly be reacting to somebody upsetting them or saying something they haven't got a right to say and outraging them, and they'll constantly have to hump about this thing. And you know, those people, the reason I found that they when you try and suggest to them that they don't have to live like that, what I noticed is those people immediately don't want to change it. They end up fighting for a right, in inverted commas, to be offended. So, you know, if you say to them, actually, that you could be completely in charge of that, you could be non-reactive, you could live your life so that from here on in, nobody has the power to press your buttons and drag you into a situation or whatever. And I've found that the minute that even begins to seem like a possibility, the people who we know, you and I all know, who seem to live in that kind of stress of constantly being drawn into things and being hurt and offended, they absolutely have no intention or no desire to give up that way of being. It's like if you gave up being offended and outraged and and being hurt when people judge you, the truth is you would also have to give up getting kicks out of doing it yourself. And that's what I found. The bottom line is that actually people more often than not don't want to give up the right to do that to other people, because it's where they get their kicks too. And when you sort of understand that, or you figure that out about yourself, I find for me it's a liberating thing. You just don't have to do it anymore. I enjoyed breaking that cycle. Right, I'm going to go off camera, polish these out, and when I've done it, I'm going to come back on, glue the nut in place, give it a scrub down, glue the nut in place lightly, and then put some new strings on the new 9s, and we'll be pretty much done. Anyway, Chris, that was all your fault, that long monologue about taking back the power to choose how you feel about things, or regaining. Arguably, we could say we always did, but maybe we didn't. Maybe as children we didn't, and we were taught pretty quickly that, everybody else has the power over us to make us feel things. So it's not regaining it. I think for a lot of people it's attaining that power for the first time. It's quite an amazing thing. Just looking at this, this is a little bit over long on one end, so I'm going to make a very small adjustment. Theoretically, I should use a device I've got specially for this, but shall I use it? The old bridge sander. Let's use the flat side of one of these. One of Bob's special nut sanding jigs. Now, what was it that I discovered? I'm going to go back to him on these. Yes, I had a discovery, and I've forgotten what it was. That's not very helpful. Yes, there was a question I had, or an observation that didn't make it work out so well for me. Anyway, I can't remember what it was just now. I'll have to remember. Anyway, so yes, a life without being your mood being chosen by other people, essentially, or how you feel. And I think one of the things I would say is, even if it's hard to imagine how to be that way, and just because it's hard, by the way, doesn't mean it's not possible to be that way. But granted that it's hard to imagine how that could be, how life is. One of the things that I found helped, or that I noticed as I was kind of working my way through this, away from being, reacting to people and choosing my own actions or feelings about things. One of the things I noticed was just how much people fight to be. This narrows inwards. I just noticed it's a bit odd. Yes, how much people fight to stay reactive. It's people will would tell me that it can't be like this, or it just couldn't. If it was like that, the world would be X. Or and there's such a powerful attachment to it being that way, because I can't see a way out of it. So I'm much happier to see it, that it's got to be this way. Which, for me, absolutely isn't the case. I try to. Sometimes I try to describe it and by saying, when I hear people talking about taking offence and reacting and lashing out because somebody's insulted them or called them a name and stuff, I don't have that. It's literally that isn't part of my existence anymore. People can say your mother's this, or your son's that, or you're this, or your wife does something else, and I just I can understand, I can sense very easily that somebody's trying to create conflict. That's tangible, you can spot that. But the idea that so many people seem to have, that your reaction to insult is they almost treat it like it's an automatic response that you can't really intervene with. So, if somebody says your mother eats elderberries and whatever terrible insult, then for some people that's you just have no choice. Or you say that about my daughter and I will blah blah blah, and they kind of give themselves reasons, or not excuses, but legitimize reacting in a certain way. And then when somebody does that thing, they sort of got permission to behave in a certain reaction to it, which I just think is really just such a strange thing. Like I said, my life isn't perfect, and sometimes I catch myself slipping back into a reactive way, as if I wasn't in charge. But the beauty for me is that I'm aware of that, and I know when I'm doing it. And sometimes I want to just carry on, and to hell with the awareness that I have a choice. I don't want to have a choice. I just want to be angry and stomp around and stuff. But once you know, and you can't do it for long, Anyway, so I'm going to do this. See you in a minute for the string refitting. Okay, right. Only balls supplied by customer. So let's make a note of that, so I don't charge him for strings, which I didn't use because I'm using those supplied. Right, so first of all, I'm going to load up these strings, and we're going to get them on, and then get the nut glued and put in place. And then we'll stretch out the strings and then intonate, and we'll be done. I've put the tremolo arm on. I've put the truss rod cover, adjuster cover on. I have cleaned everything up, polished the frets, as you can see. So we're ready to go. Everything's clean and fresh and lovely. Oh, we've got to put some oil on the fretboard in a second. Once I put these strings through, we're nearly there. Right. So, I talked to myself to a standstill in the previous section. But hey, that's what it's like. Right. Packaging in the bin. Bin needs soon to go to the tip. And here we go. Some oil. Fresh oil. Lemon oil. So I often sleep with this kind of sleep headphone thing on, and sometimes I like to have a sort of ambient sound or a white brown noise or something like that. Or sometimes I put on an audiobook and then the thing's finished by the morning and I haven't remembered any of it and I have to go back and start it again. Or sometimes I stupidly leave LBC talk radio on and end up having kind of extreme dreams because of the shouty sort of carry on that seems to go with talk style radio. Anyway, so for last night I put on a little app on the iPhone, probably on the iPhone, called Soundgarden, I think it is, and that's what I'm going to do first. What I'm thinking, I'm going to put on the middle ones so that I'm ready to sort of, I'll loosely put them on, so I'm ready to pull them down on the nut when I place the nut on with a bit of glue, so I can lock it down fairly quickly. Anyway, yeah, so I put on this app called Soundgarden. It's an absolutely brilliant app. It sort of does, it's like the app that I sort of wished I'd had, but I kind of did have in a different format in my childhood. So you basically have a whole map of the world, and you sort of kind of move around, and there's millions of little dots that all represent radio stations in foreign places. I mean, every country has got thousands of them, and as you zoom in, you can see even more, and so on. Anyway. So I put on last night a Japanese radio station, and I've forgotten the name of the place, but it was somewhere I sort of vaguely recognised. Anyway, I put this Japanese radio station on, and it was really nice because, and it had a weird effect because I had no idea what they were saying, obviously, not being a Japanese speaker, but they went between speech and some music, and the music was an interesting mix of things, and I ended up kind of enjoying listening to this music that I wouldn't normally get on a radio station at night or my normal fare, and so at the end, at the one point in the night that I ended up, they ended up playing reggae, and I remember sort of dancing to reggae in my dream. It was a great sort of way to end the night's dreaming, dancing to really good reggae and stuff that I hadn't really heard before. I didn't quite know what it was. It's quite obscure that these Japanese channels had managed to dig up from somewhere. Anyway, so that was it, and I remember thinking that the combination of the human voices, which is a nice sound, but not with no connection, or no locking onto what they mean, what they were actually talking about, because I don't speak Japanese. Plus, kind of interspersed with unexpected music, and some of it Japanese pop, which I'd never really listened to before. So there's all kinds of interesting things. I thought that's what I need to do. Is I'm going to travel around this app every night or other night or whatever, and I'm just going to go and find all these strange languages that I've never heard or never spoken before, and get them to talk to me. Right. So, Mr. Friend of Greg's, friend of Greg's, yeah, or friend of Martin's, I've forgotten, Greg or Martin's. Anyway, the important thing about tuning, if you want permanent good tuning stability, is get your nut right and get all the slack out of your strings. And those two things, I'm afraid you've got a little bit of rust here on your high E string, your only ball. Scratch it off with my thumbnail if I can. So what you want to do to make sure they stay in tune, your string will stay in tune, is the nut has to be friction free, which is why I always use Tusk, and ideally even better if it can be the original untouched factory slots, i.e. you haven't had to cut downwards with files to get to the right first fret action. So you want smooth friction free strings, you want the perfect first fret action, and that's the nut part taken care of. You get that bit right, and then the other 50% of tuning stability is stretching your strings out thoroughly before you play, the first time when you've changed them. And the amount of slack that stays locked up in these strings is quite astonishing, and it can stay locked up for years until you physically pull it out. And often I'll get guitars that are maybe a year or so old, or they've been on a peg for a year, and it's only when I get hold of them that I just give them a pull and I can stretch the slack right out of them. So the point being is that even when somebody thinks their strings have been on there long enough to perform properly, you'll find that if you haven't done this physical hard stretching, you'll find that there's still slack in there, and it will always be eking its way out whenever you don't want it to. That's interesting. These are, let me check. Before I pronounce. Yeah, this is just a tiny fraction different in the amount of pull on these strings. So I'm just going to counter this a tiny bit more, just to get this tremolo to sit just on the top without any forward movement. Want it as light as possible on the downward movement, but you don't want it leaning forward unless you want a fully floating one, of course. Okay, now these saddles have moved since I have taken them out, so I need to readjust those. Okay, so I'm going to get the readjust the action, since it seems to have moved during my cleaning process, annoyingly. But hey, that's what you kind of expect to get when you do cleaning. So I'm going to sort of quickly do everything down in a flurry. See where we get to and then fine tune it. Okay. Unfortunately, these aren't the greatest strings. You might want to change these again. I mean, they're your strings, so I'm not going to snap them and chuck them away. But you might want to replace them sooner rather than later, because they are a little bit on the rusty side. Okay. Okay, just about there on the action. So I'm going to first of all just give them a tug to seat them properly. And being 9s, I'm not going to pull them too hard because I don't want to break them straight away. Okay, so after the first tune-up, what I'm now going to do is throw the cloth on the floor. What I'm now going to do is stretch the strings manually between thumb and forefinger. There is a plastic device you can get for this. When I used it, I found I broke more strings than I do doing it this way, so I prefer, even though it's a bit tiring on the fingers, I prefer to feel the amount of strength, whatever pressure I'm putting into the strings. Seems, every time I say this, it saves me from breaking so many. Guess what? I end up breaking some. So don't be surprised if I go straight ahead and break some. Tune up again. Usually find that the wound strings take a little bit longer than the plain ones to settle down, because they've got more slack caught up in them. Really got to put in the time now. If you put in the time at the beginning like this, you never have to do it again. It will stay in tune, and it will be in tune when you pretty much when you pick it up off the peg the next time. That's a pretty nice aspect of it. The little hex key I'll attach to the back of the scratch plate or something, back of the rear cover. That is for adjusting the nut. Oh, I know what I was going to do. Take it off and sand down the grub screws. Pretty much there. Now I'm going to mess that up a little bit by slacking these off and removing the nut, and I'm this time doing it the wrong way round. So let's leave the middle one close as we can to the last off. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull that off, and I'm going to take down, it looks pretty fine, it hasn't dented it or anything, but I'm still going to take down these sticky out bits of the grub screws. Just I'd like to do this so that the grub screw has the maximum surface area pressing on the plastic of the nut base. It's just a cautionary thing. It's never done me any harm doing that before, so I carry on doing it just to be safe rather than sorry. So I just smooth it out now. Now, the flatter I get this right now, the more spread the load of the weight on the grub screws will be, or sorry, the weight of the grub screws, pressure of the grub screws on the underlying 3D printed plastic will be. Anyway, so now that's changed my settings obviously because I've sanded that down, but squeeze that back into there. I'll need to dial it up a little bit again in a minute. Replace the strings. So straight away I've taken a bit of height off, so I need to just dial it in, raise these up, dial it in, raise these up. There you go. Now under full pressure, I just check that that's pretty well set there on the nut. Just a little bit of a stretch again to bed the strings on, particularly the wound ones. Catch. Fab. Right, last bit of the day, well, prior to putting on the cover on the back, just going to check the intonation, make sure the jack socket's tight, which it is. Always check that. This is a little bit tricky because, as always, jack socket wants to press on the ground and get in the way. Long. Got a feeling I'm going to dump that high E. Yeah. See, that high E is wrong. And the D, apparently, could be wrong too. I think that's interesting. So the D is too long and the E is too long. And I think the E is wrong because it's got rust on it. That's my personal take on it. I think I've got a spare E string here, which I certainly have. I'm going to lose this E because I don't like it. It's just rusty. Sorry. I happen to have a spare, so you can have it, but that strings that are old and showing signs of rust, probably, you know, I would start by distrusting them. Distrusting them. We put the rust in distrust, eh? But hey, let's put this on. I bet this will intonate this E now without needing to be moved anywhere. There you go. Funny that, isn't it? That's all the problem with the string. All the string's fault. Fixed. Okay, intonation was right. I got that right. Except that first string was lying to me. And it's not good. There we go. Right. I am calling it time. There we have it. The Wasburn Maverick series, as you can see, set up, cleaned up, refreshed, everything nice and fresh looking, beautifully refreshed, and nice tremolo working in tune, everything working nicely. You know, got a vintage feel to it, this guitar. Got that, definitely a Matsumoku Japan feel. Maybe I dreamed it up last night. Yeah, adjustable nut, cleaned up everything, cleaned up tuners, cleaned up headstock, cleaned up fingerboard, de-cheesed fingerboard, and yeah, ready to go. Thanks for watching.